Hey, thanks for joining me. Before you move on, please hit the like button and subscribe. I know, you hate to subscribe to too many channels, but mine is unique. No cost for sign up and no cost for cancellation. And you'd be doing me a great favor and possibly yourself and others, exposing them to the content, which of course, I hope is relevant. Okay guys, this is part 2 of a 4-part video working with forms in Microsoft Access Relational Database. In part 1, we created a singular form with multiple tables and talked about the issues and solutions with doing it. And here in part 2, we're going to improve upon the navigation and put through the form and put some in flow controls and data input controls to make it easier and more accurate. With that, let's go. Forms. All right. So now you've seen how you can link the different forms together based on their content. And remember that for this to work, you have to be in the record that you want to connect with. So if I want this record, I have to be in that record. Remember, if I click over here, even though I'm there, now watch this, this will be interesting. Do I get New York or do I get San Francisco? I get New York because that's where I clicked. That's where the focus was. It says take the record from which you exited from. And the same thing here is that you're down here, you're going to open that, and you're going to get the related information. So I hope you think that's cool. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to go back and look at this triple form. So I wanted to talk about navigation, because when we go through here and we've done this, we get to the end of our first form in our first data set, customer location, customer list, and then I tap from it. It does go into my subform automatically and has all the information about that particular location for that customer. But now I want to come down here and I want to be able to say, hey, I want to be able to get into this form after I leave this form. And what happens, watch what happens. You automatically stay in this form. There's never any getting to this final form. The only way you can get to this form is if you click in it or you put in some controls in there so it automatically flips down. And if that's your desired result is to have it automatically flip down here, then let's do the following. We're going to make when we leave focus of this record, we're going to throw that focus down to this form and it's going to show up here for us. Now this is another thing that I did a lot of work on, and again I'm hoping it's saving you time, is that when I looked this up to see how I can move focus from one form to the other, they kept on talking about throwing the focus up to the parent form, down to the other one. You had to throw it up there and define the field. Watch what we have to do. We only need to know one thing. And that one thing is the name of the form that we want to be going to. So we're going to copy it here. Okay. And then we're going to go back up to our first subform. And we're going to click on shipping mode, and let's say when we exit that form, try and move things around here a little bit. When I exit this form, ship mode ID on exit or on lose focus, let's do the following. So go to, forgot, that's it, go to, and the name of the form. That's it. When I looked this up, it said you had to go up to the parent form, back to the subform, and then name the control. It just says, no, throw it over there. Watch what happens here. So come up here and we'll save this. Now we're back in the 4-table single form. And so we're going to come up to here, and I want to navigate down here. Watch what happens. Boom, see, automatically went down there. But did you notice something when I did that? Take a look at the order ID up there, 147039, and that's one reason I like to have this still visible, is so that you can see this. It's 147039. I want to come down and visit this. Now to keep that from happening, I did not find a VBA way or a access built-in way that you could do that. I mean, I can't think of the word, but by say natural desire to not change the record when you flip from form to form. And I could say, well, hey, flip it a different field, but the thing is that you're going to want to fill this in typically. You're going to want to go over there and make sure that that's correct. Maybe 90% of the time you're going to do standard class, but you don't want it to flip when you go from 1 to 1. So I came up with the following way to do this. I think it's maybe one of those kind of jury rigs, but it works. And until I find out, and again, if you're like me and you're an individual and you're trying to get something to work, you try and just get things to work. So what I did is that I just added a field into the end of my row there. So I went up there and I created a text box, popped it in there, kind of like that button is, that we put in there. So I'm going to put this in here. And now what happens is that it doesn't write or shift the record focus until you leave the last field on the row. So I'm never going to go into here. I just have it there kind of as a dummy record or a dummy field. Now the thing is that when you have it there and then you go and you look at it, there it is. Why is that there? You never have to explain yourself. Maybe you can just put some text in there to just whatever, but you don't. What I decided to do is almost make it invisible. Now you can't use the property invisible. If you use that, then it does act like it's not there, even though it's there internally. So I went to format, and what you do is you see where it says border style and it says solid, and I just went ahead and chose transparent. That means you cannot see it now, even though it's there. See, it's gone. So now, when I go to here and I get the first class, it pops it down there. Notice the field didn't change. It's still 14147039. And if I do it here, see, it's still 2020. This is 483. It's still 483. So that's the way that I got around it. So let's walk through a scenario that we haven't done yet. And that's, say the customer calls and they're a new customer. What do? Well, you want to create a new record, right? And we don't have the customer number created yet. That's made up of the customer name. Then we have the segment ID that they put them in. Then we have the location ID, which will be generated for us. There's a repeat of the customer name, which would be from up here, and then we have the location, and then we can have an order if we want to. So right now we need to create a customer number and an order and a location ID that will generate that information for us automatically. So let's do that, and we'll get this thing working smoothly. So we're going to design view, and we're going to do this on the customer. Our first ones we're going to do is that we've done this in previous videos, so I'm going to copy the data or the code into here. So the customer ID is based off the first initial of the first name and the first initial of the last name plus a random number of some sort generated, I don't know, 7, 10, 15, 100 part. So what we can do is what we need though is that we need for nothing to go into here. So I'm going to take the tab stop off the customer ID. So we'll go into here, other, and we'll say it says tab stop, and we'll say no. And then after we enter the customer's name, we'll then generate the customer ID. So because we need the customer name, so we can come back over here to customer name, and on event we can say, shoot, what are we going to do it on? Change or on lost focus or on exit? Let's do it on lost focused. And so we'll come into here, and I like this command or this if statement. Is if me dot new record, and what that is really cool is that you don't have to before I knew about that, I was having to check to see if the primary key was null or empty or anything like that, and just says, hey, if it's a new record, then go ahead and do this. If it's not a new record, then don't do it. So I need to say, if this is a new record, I need to generate that key. Okay, I don't know if you've watched the other ones before, but let me just walk through this real quick. I say, once I've lost focus of the customer name, I ask if it's a new record. If it is, then I'm going to create two variables, and it's FN, which is for first name, and GN is for last name, and they're string. And then I have this concatenation of, I guess, functions here, where I say I want the leftmost name, and what I'm going to do in here, FN is going to be the leftmost name, and so I find out and I look for the space that's between the names, and then I minus one because that gives me the number of characters from the left for the first name, and that goes in the first name. Then I have the right, and it's kind of interesting. I say the length of the whole field minus where I find the space, and that'll give me the length of the last name, and that is in GN. And then I go ahead and do another left statement on the first name, and I just take the first character, and then I do the same thing with the given name. I take the left of the given name, which has the last name in it, but I just want the first character. Then down here I tell it customer ID is equal to the first name character plus the last name character plus a dash plus a, and then I go into actually I created a query that separates out the text from the number so I can find the actual maximum value. And I did that in a query, and I'll show that to you here in a second. And the name of that field that I created, and there's customer N, and the name of the query is customer N for simplicity. And then what happens is that I add 15 to that, so every time I create a new customer ID, it gets 15 additional digits or units or integers added on. And that's all if it's new. Now let me look at the query real quick just as a recap. And I go into here, and here is the customer N. And I'm not going to go into great detail here. I do that in other videos, but down here I just wanted to show you that here's the customer number, and I'm taking the right side from wherever I find the second dash in there, because that's why I have it starting, or actually it has one dash in there. So when I find the first dash, that's the number of characters I take away from the right, and that gives me the number value no matter how large that number is, and then I change it into a numeric character. So that's what we did there. Alright, so back to business here. And let's make sure that the actual customer name is actually customer name. It is. So that's still correct. But the customer ID was not the same name, and that's why I couldn't find it. So let's hope that works. Okay, so let's create a new record. Alright, notice it's in the customer name. And there we go. See how it created the TS and gave us a number 22676. And do a home office. Now the thing is, when we get to this part, we need to have a location ID. So we needed to be able to do that to generate the proper information. So let's go ahead and create the location ID. We'll save this, go to design view, we'll click on location ID, and we'll do that on when it gets focus. When it gets focus. And we'll go into code. So I want the maximum location ID in the customer location table plus 1. That would work. That's why it'll only work if you put in the right information. So let's try this again. There we go. See? So as soon as I hit that, there it goes. It got focus. It gave us a number. Notice that Taylor Smith got put into the customer name because there's a link between the actual two tables, and then we can go ahead and finish filling in the rest of it. down here. Now we can do the order ID. So now once we hit here, we want to put in the order ID and get that working for us. Now I'm going to do a couple other things here. Is that I'm actually going to put in some defaults here to make data entry easier. In other words, the order date would be the date that you're putting in the order. And then I'm going to say, let's just say you looked at your records and the typical ship date is 7 days after the order. So you can put that in there too. And then you can also say your most popular ship method is standard. So we can put that and fill that all in, and then the person doing the data entry can actually accept it or change it. So let's do the following. So when order ID gets focus, we'll go down in the code builder. Now this is that I also have a order ID. Let me flip back for a second. Order ID, when we go down to our order, it's a CA or it's a US, and then it's got the date, the year in there, and then it's got a random number at the end. So that's what we have to build. I looked, they have CA or US, and I'm just going to go ahead and use US. There's no reason to use CA. I couldn't find any relevant reason. And I figure US is for US orders, and then we can go either to state or to, I don't think, I actually tried the state. It was too hard to be able to take out the correct ones for that. So anyway, that's what we're going to do. We're going to use US, the current year, plus the height, the number. Now I had to create another query for that, where it's order info. It's order ID info is the query, and I did the same thing in there. As I went in here and I extracted out the maximum number, and so I could, in a sense, dissect the text from the numeric values. And so that's what I did in here. And because there is 2 dashes, I had it start on the 5th letter of that particular field, so it would find this one here, and that would give me a better, it starts at 5, and then it would count over to find the second one. That way, if the numbers are larger than, say, 5 or 6 digits, which I counted, for some reason they're in there larger, I don't have to worry about that. It automatically counts for it. So that's what I did there. And so what we need to do is we need to build that. So we'll come back over here and we'll say, hey, if me.newRecord, then let's go ahead and create the following. me.order ID is equal to US dash, end quote, concatenate that with, we're going to format the date. I'm going to do both of these at the same time, date, and then to put in just the year of the system date, you use 4 Ys, and then we'll put the ending parenthesis in there, and then we'll concatenate that with another dash. Have to put that dash in quotes, and concatenate that with finally the dmax of what we find in the query, and the field is going to be order ID, and the domain name is going to be order ID info. And we're going to just, I looked at, and the most common separation between the values was 7, so we're just going to do 7. Doesn't really matter. And then we'll go and we'll say and if. So if it's a new record, concatenate US with a couple dashes, the date in the year format, and whatever it finds as the maximum value in the order ID info query, and then we'll add 7 to that whenever order ID is a new record. So I'm going to do form view, and again let's go to our last record, and we got all this data in here now, and then boom, when we hit that, look what happens. We automatically have an order ID. And now let's go ahead and fill in these things too, so that the next time we go into a new record, these go in there as default. So let's do that. You can do this at the table level, or you can do it here in the form. And there's advantages to each, because this way you don't have to repeat it every time. But then on the other hand, if it's in the table, then it happens every time. So It really depends on the diversity of your usage of your tables. So we can come into, I'm going to go into order date, and let's get the, and I'm going to say what is the default, click on data and default value, and you can just say this is date. Now what's interesting is you notice here is that I put in open close parentheses. You do that here, but you don't do it in the VB code. Very interesting to me. And then, now what's interesting though is that if you want to, the ship date, the default value, let's say, is the date plus 7, right? Now, if you change the order date, the way it sits, the ship date's not going to change 7 days automatically. We would have to write a little bit of code, like say on, we could say on change, for example, if we did here and we said, okay, go into event, and we said, okay, on change, right? We went into here and we said, okay, code date, on change, then me dot order date on change, then I actually me dot ship date is equal to me dot order date plus 7. So how's that? So we could do something like that. So let's do a form view, and let's go to our last record. Now notice that there's nothing there now, but let's say today's the 8th, I guess. So let's just say though it's this order was meant to be on the 31st. We forgot to enter it. See, it didn't change there. The ship date didn't change. So now we're down here at the bottom like we should be. Let's just try this though. Okay, so see how we have 4/8, and now let's say we type in 3/31. Still 4/15. So that didn't work. Okay, we got it to work here. So click in there. There's a new order, and I'm going to change this to 3/31/2022, and it does change it to the 7th for so approximately 7 days. Now, what did I do differently? Let's take a look. I just changed where we did the bit of code, so I changed that from after update. So in other words, after it actually updated itself, then if it was different, then I went ahead and executed this code. So you can see that you need to play around with some of this. If it doesn't work, it doesn't mean it didn't work. It's just maybe it didn't trigger correctly. And so you try and play with those. And one of my focuses, I'm going to try and learn all these events and what they actually have to have the form do in order to trigger some of those events. Okay, so we're going to save that. The last thing we're going to do on this form, not maybe the last thing, but one of the last things we're going to do is that, remember when we get over here and we kind of get triggered down here and we need to get a row ID. So let's create a row ID. Now also notice, this is kind of interesting, that actually caused me some concern. I'm on this record right here, generated it, right? Then I'm going to kick down here. Notice that there's no order ID in here, but when I click on this one, there's an order ID, and I click on this one, there's an order ID. Why is that? And it's because it's an empty record at this point. There's nothing down there. So let's do the row ID and see what happens here. Save it, come down to row ID, and we'll say once it gets focus, let's go ahead and have it build the row ID for us. So this is what we did. We said if it's a new record, then me.rowID equals a maximum value of the row ID that's already in the table, of the row ID that's already in the table, and we're just going to add one to it because that's all we need. And then we'll flip back over here, save, form view, and so if we're here and watch what happens. See, it automatically generates that number for us, but also look what happens. As soon as it got the primary key built, it automatically transferred the record information that connected the two together. Then we can go ahead and put in our products and things like that. Just the last couple of things that I'd recommend doing if you're working on a form like this is that the order ID doesn't need to be an editable field or even enter into it. So you may want to, once you hit it, you may want to just jump the focus over to the next field that does have it. For example, it'd be order date. And here we don't need order ID or row ID, and so we maybe want to just jump it right into the product ID because that's where we want our users to start. And the more help we can get them, give them the better, and the less chance of bad data or mistakes. So we're going to take the tab stop off these. We're going to tell it that you cannot change it, and we're going to throw the focus to the next field over. So when I get the order ID, and so I said when you get focus, and there's our focus, right? If it's a new record, it doesn't even matter if it's a new record. We really just do not want to be in it. So if we're in the new record of the order ID, we want to go over to order date. So I'm going to say do command dot go to control, and that control is going to be order date. So that is it. So then, just so we can come over here and see how that works. So when I get over here, I'm going to hit order date, and boom, it's automatic, or order ID, and automatically flips it over here. So like for example, if you do click in it, see how I clicked in it and it automatically jumped it over to order date, so it doesn't stay there. Now you can also take the tab stop out of that, and that'll do it automatically as well, but the difference with the tab stop is that then you don't trigger the event. So, but you may want to make it no edits, and so just real quick to show you where those are is that if you go to order ID and you do not want to make it editable, you lock it, and that way when your users maybe try and get in there for whatever reason, notice it won't go there, but it's still locked, just making sure. Same thing here. Once we hit row ID, we want to say no, I want to flip over and get it to product ID and leave these two alone. Don't make them do extra work. So we'll do that. We'll go into design view, come down here to row ID. In the event, in the exact same event, we don't have to build a new event, and regardless if it's a new record or not, we want to say do command dot go to control, and that's going to be product ID. And let's make sure I did that right. Yep, I did. Okay, so we're going to do that regardless. So when I get over here, I'll flip down there, it creates the row ID, flip this right over into product ID. So there's some things just to make navigation a little bit easier right out of the bucket. You know, you've created this, you've got it working, and now you've got some navigation controls on it too. We did show you this. We showed the defaults on that, and we showed you the defaults. So if for some reason this changes, you know, we need to do an update because we didn't change the default. See how it changes automatically to 7 days after that. Now, can I change this? Let's say order date's actually 4/15/2022. Yep, see? It only changes it when this changes. See? No change, no change. But let's say I change this to 3. See? Changes it to here. So that would be the default, and then we just have to type that in. Oh, the only thing I forgot here is standard class. Let me show you that real quick. And the reason for that is because when you go into that particular field, in the ship mode ID, it is actually a numeric value. It is not text because it's a lookup field. It's looking up the text value based on a numeric value, the primary keys. So the input value or the default value is not going to be standard class. It's actually going to be number 2. I just happen to know that, trust me. And so it's going to be number 2 because that's what it does to look up the particular text. Then when we go into here and we say save, we go to form view, and then when we click on a new record, see how it automatically put in standard class for us at number 2. So, well, that's it for this part. In the next part, part 3, we'll be creating a series of forms and linking them together so that they reveal relevant data from the primary form. And then in part 4, we'll work on implementing navigation controls to make accessing the data easier and the data input controls for better and more accurate data input. I look forward to seeing you again, and thanks for watching, leaving a like and a subscribe if you haven't already. Until then, bye-bye.